Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tone-Based YouTube channel for our third stream of the day. This one was supposed to take place on the I'm Not Your Lawyer show and Jason
technical difficulties
Seibert's YouTube channel. And there he is, interrupting again, even from the beginning. My audience is now very familiar with Jason. Jason, say hi.
Hey, guys. Thanks, Tone. We were having some technical difficulties with my stream from OBS here, and thanks for volunteering to host this program this evening. This is going to be what was promised based on our last show together, which was on the 10th anniversary or the 10th birthday of Bitcoin, which is when we started talking about the Bitcoin standard and Seifert's work and economic analysis that stemmed from the concept of whether or not Bitcoin is a store of value or not. And so from there, a lot of people started referring to this book. I'll hold it up. It's the Bitcoin Standard by Dr. Seibert Amos.
He's Seibert the Moose.
Everybody, that's Junseth. He's here as well. And so what I wanted to do tonight is basically kind of a fireside chat conversation that goes into the book. Now, one of the things that I did prior to the start of this, and a lot of people were saying, hey, you're trashing Seifert's book. Why don't you, say exactly what you have an issue with? And I said, you know what, let me go back and let me actually go through it to make a point instead of getting into a Twitter fight over the intricacies and fine points of the issue. And, so in that, I went back, I reread the book, highlighted some issues, and then in the meantime, also put out a Twitter poll. Some of you might have saw it, where I asked whether or not they thought that this book was an opinion piece or an academic work, like a textbook or something that can be relied upon for, educational purposes. What's interesting is that about 67% of the people thought that this was an opinion piece and not an academic work. And just right from the beginning, Tone, what do you think? Do you think that this book is an opinion piece, or is it an academic work? Should it be taught in schools?
I don't think it's that black and white. I think it's I don't think it's a text. Clearly not a textbook. I wasn't a huge fan of the gold standard. I didn't like the current monetary system either. I think Seifert's book has me leaning towards it a little bit more than I was before I read that book. And I would say if I had to, I'd lean a little bit closer to an opinion piece, but it's a pretty damn good one. And I do think this is something that should be studied in schools. Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Junseth, academic work or opinion piece?
It's the of pandas and people of crypto religion.
That wasn't an answer.
It really was. You just don't know what of pandas and people is. Everyone Google it now.
Junseth, everyone. Once again, dropping.
Yeah, we should probably introduce Junseth, because I don't think my audience, a small niche of my audience is familiar with Junseth's work in the past.
Thank God.
Who wants to do it? Junseth, you or me, Jason?
Well, let's start with Junseth. Why don't you just tell everyone just a little bit about your background, education, knowledge, learning, thirst for life, Bitcoin.
My name is Junseth. I am a crypto enthusiast. I used to run a podcast known as Bitcoin Uncensored, and made mostly fart jokes, and did what I could to enhance the creative culture of Bitcoin.
Now, respecting your anonymity, you're actually a very highly educated man. You have
God damn it, Jason! Not true.
You have a degree from one of the most respected schools
college
in the entire United States. It's not Harvard, but you can say whatever you want. And
St. Augustine.
And as a result, where most people think that all you do is tell fart jokes all day long, I can attest based on my review of your bona fides and curriculum.
And sometimes they're full-on poop jokes.
Certainly, that Junseth is an incredibly learned man. Now, Tone, what's your background? Where what's your history? What's your education?
Really? Okay, so we are limited on time. I believe my audience knows my background very well. I have degrees in geology, math, and financial engineering. Worked on Wall Street 9 years. Damn, I wanted to make it to that 10th year anniversary. Only made it 9. And then I quit that and been in the crypto space ever since. Was going to be a full-time trader to make money, but got too busy doing YouTube channels and stuff.
Okay, so this all goes into kind of setting the stage for the basis of opinion and the basis of conversation that you guys come from an educational experience, both formally educated and street educated, and you're bringing that knowledge to bear when you're talking about the economic ideas that are in this book. Now, Tone, we'll start with you.
Well, what's I want to give props to Junseth because I did listen to every episode of Bitcoin Uncensored that he was on. And you guys did amazing work. Really disappointing when that all fell apart. And I still recommend people go back to learn about the history of Bitcoin between 2014 and 2016 by taking the Bitcoin Uncensored challenge and watching those episodes. Some of my content when I was starting out was actually shaped by some of the things that you guys said, and I tried picking up some of that style.
Well, that explains why no one watches your show.
Yeah. I also I think took a good portion of your audience when your show fell apart. I'm not gonna deny that.
That's all right. You can have them. They were shitty anyways. All of you suck.
All right, now we can get onto it. We have about 55 minutes, and then I got to get to dinner.
Great, not a problem. So when I read, that's awesome. So once again, just kind of proof of review. I'm just going to hold up for the audience. This isn't something I'm making up. I've gone through this almost page by page, highlighting certain sections and fact checking basically.
Jason's a smart one here. We are here just as talking heads.
Actually, what I'm doing here is I'm analyzing this from a mathematical proof section, but also simultaneously applying like a little bit of a legal rubric of, okay, you're making a case for Bitcoin to be the Bitcoin standard. Have you used sufficient evidence and factual evidence in order to support that case, that argument, right? And the book even has a sentence in here that seems to wrap up like the intent of the book. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier offline, but the book seems to be trying to drive at, the answer to the question is 4, and what kind of equation can I create in order to meet that answer? And 4 in this case, the answer that he's trying to arrive at is a quote, and the quote is that Bitcoin creates a new type of asset well suited for playing the role of store of value. And this kind of exploded in our conversation last week, Tone, on the 10th birthday. And so real quickly, let's get to the discussion. Is Bitcoin well suited to play the role of store of value? And before you answer that, what's your definition of a store of value?
So up until Bitcoin, my definition of a store of value was something that would maintain its value over time. Now, gold does that pretty well, but as Junseth knows very well, gold is not a very good investment. Putting your money in the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones over time is significantly better investment.
But is there a difference between a store of value and an investment, Tone? There's a difference between a store of value and an investment, though, isn't there?
Yeah, no, there is. But no one really. I mean, I consider the S&P 500 a pretty good store of value as well. But there is one major risk you'd have to go global, right? So if if you put it depends where in the stock market you go. You have to be completely globally diversified. We can get into the weeds on this, right? So
we don't need to go into the weeds. It's just a matter of whether what you consider to be a store of value. And then the second part of that question is Bitcoin an asset well suited for playing the store of value? Because that seems to be the answer to the question that Seibert trying to get to here.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty well suited to be a store of value. But of course, it comes with risks, like the technological risk that Bitcoin could not succeed, and there could be a giant bug, and there goes the blockchain.
Okay, Junseth, go.
Okay, so the essential premise of a store of value is that if I can buy a suit with X amount of this thing today, 100 years from now, I could buy a suit with the same amount of this thing then. Okay.
Sounds like a gold coin.
Okay, so that's the libertarian love of gold. They'll talk about how you could buy a toga in ancient Greece with a troy ounce of gold, and today you can buy a suit with a troy ounce of gold. Therefore, gold has remained a similar value over time. It has retained its value per the amount that it has. I think that's
so. Let's talk about why it's maintained that strength or that steady power over time. If you go and you look at the price of gold for the last century, we see that for a very long time it had a certain value, and it was pretty much a set stable value. And then in 1974, Ford allowed people to own gold again. And the price of gold has gone from $35 an ounce up to, what is it today?
About 1,200.
1,200. Okay.
1,200, right? But before then, gold was, for the most part, artificially maintained stable by government decree and use as a international trading function, that it was going to have a set price, right? So you had the mandate in 1900 that gold was going to be $20. And then when the gold standard was removed in the Great Depression, gold was again mandated to be handed in for $20. And so you had this artificially mandated price that kept that standard value point. So I guess what I'm getting at is it seems that even when they talk about, or when Seibert talks about gold being a good store of value, and some of the best ages that any economy has ever had has been when it was backed by some form of, very, hard store of value. Even he admits
Gilded Age argument.
Yes, the Gilded Age argument. During the Gilded Age, that price was artificially suppressed by a centralized authority. So when you get into the traditional concept of the classic, gold standard, you're getting into if you're not including the fact that there were externality pressures in a non-free market maintaining the price of that gold. I don't think you get that gold standard as that store of value. So, I mean, and that's part of my problem with the book, is that it seems to have maybe 2/3 or half of each issue that gets examined in order to get to this end result that Bitcoin is a store of value. For example, we can start off right in the beginning of the book where he talks about the Yap culture and the use of
the rye stones.
The rye stones, right? Do you recall that portion of the book, Tone?
Yeah, my memory's pretty good. Not as good as Junseth's, but it's pretty good.
Okay, so do you guys recall rye stones? How that worked?
Yeah.
And I like how Seibert I actually give him props. He went out and he picked a currency that existed at one point in time that is very similar to Bitcoin. Right. There was communal knowledge on what the value was. You didn't actually have to maintain ownership for people to recognize that you had that you owned the device. You didn't have to have physical control of it. But he comes to the wrong result in history of how it melted down. Here he says that O'Keefe, this guy that basically goes in and hard forks the rye stones, caused the destruction of the money and effectively the culture of that money.
Well, I wouldn't say hard fork. I'd say inflate. I guess you can call that a hard fork.
Well,
he starts manufacturing rye stones.
Well, yeah. Well, what happens, right, is that the village leaders say, no, we're not going to recognize these rhinestones that this guy O'Keefe brings in, because they're not brought in the traditional way. They're not mined the traditional way, right? So instead, we're just not going to include those in our metric. But there's a portion of the community that says, why? It's still a rhinestone.
By the way, this is actually one of the things
like a hard fork, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this is one of the things that infuriated me about the book is the Bitcoin standard. The notion of a standard in Bitcoin has been a meson wet dream since the beginning of Bitcoin. It's not like this has been a non-discussed subject for the last 10 years. It's just that Saifedean put it into text. So he's taking credit for this thing that Bitcoiners, I mean, it's always been stupid, but the Bitcoiners have been talking about this for 10 years. And that Yapstone example, I mean, how many Bitcoiners have heard the Yapstone example long before it made its way into the pages of his book? All he was doing was taking summations of these arguments that were in forums previous to the writing of his piece and putting them in the pages of a book with a little bit more detail than most people had ever come up with.
But what we do here,
okay, I want to defend.
hold on, let me finish up on that. Let me finish up on that. What I find lacking in the book is in this entire section on the Yapstones, there's zero citation to where the information is coming from. Right? Now, Tone.
That was the entire book, by the way. There's very little citation.
He has some citations in certain places.
There is some, but there's a lot of it's just conjecture. So much of it is conjecture.
Sure. Now, Tone, you wanted to reply. Go ahead.
Well, okay. So a couple of things there. So what is wrong with him? Well, will you want him to give credit to people on Reddit that also use the same example? Just because that example has been used prior to him writing the book doesn't mean it's an invalid example.
No. I guess from my standpoint as a book review, if this is an opinion piece or it's an academic work, to bring in the example of the Rhinestone to say that O'Keefe caused the failure of that society, you have to put evidence of it. You're getting that right. You need a citation of where you're getting this information from.
It's exactly the same thing with like the same thing with the tulip bubble. We barely have enough information to know whether the tulip bubble actually happened, and yet we cite it all the time.
I think that's right. Yeah,
I try not.
You try not to, thank God, but we cite it all the time. There is not enough evidence to even know whether it actually happened.
Right. So one of the frustrating things, having studied as much as I have in various things. Again, Renaissance man, I'm only an expert on very few things, but I try to be knowledgeable about a lot of stuff. And anybody that studied the history of the Yap people knows that, yeah, they had rhinestones, but they also had the red necklace monetary culture that was used more than rhinestones. And on top of that, it wasn't O'Keefe that caused the destruction of the rhinestones being an economy. It was the Germans that came in, seized all of them, closed off the geographic area of where rhinestones could be obtained, and then tainted all the rhinestones with like black paint and took them out of the economy and forced the Yap people to like do their bidding. So, I mean, to say that it was O'Keefe by hard forking that caused the failure of this monetary system, which is basically the statement that's being made here, is just factually inaccurate and doesn't need to be made. It just doesn't, right? He could have very easily said, we've had examples of open ledger systems in the past, and the rhinestones are a good example. Do the academic work to show that, to support his proof that you can have a limited supply be a successful deal, right?
I think it is important, though. I think he has to write a bullshit story in order to act as a dog whistle for anyone who actually wants to know whether this is an opinion piece filled with conjecture or whether it's actually a academic work. He has to let you know that you're about to read something retarded.
Well, that's interesting.
I think that's a little too much there.
It is a low statement. I mean, again, I'm in the middle. Junseth is on the. It's not a good book. Tone, you're on the good book side. Go ahead, make the good book argument.
Okay, so how about this? Now, let me throw it back at you, Jason. What did you like about the book?
Oh, I thought it was a great story. You know, I from an attorney standpoint, if I was trying to defend this position, but I didn't have good facts, I may have actually, attempted some of the fast and loose behavior in a courtroom that was done here, and then let a jury decide what the facts are, right? But I don't think this is fair, because I don't think it's giving all the facts. But he's making an argument. I think the end section on Bitcoin and his technical analysis, obviously he didn't write this. This was probably written by Tour or a bunch of other folks that gave him information that was inserted in here. So there's some pretty good things in the back.
Okay, so can we
but from a storytelling standpoint, I thought it was good. I mean,
guys, I honestly can't debate, like pre 19th century, right? Because I didn't do my research on
that's fair.
So there's nothing I can do to argue for why I like the book based on that. Thank you for the information. And hopefully our viewers will go and start researching the history of rhinestones.
Well, there's a lot of examples in here that.
But it's also worth noting before you get there, Jason, the entire book is pre-19th century until it gets to Bitcoin.
No, I don't know. No, he's got a bunch of 20th century.
It's an overstatement. He loves Keynes, but my point is that like this entire book is like the only section on Bitcoin is like the very end.
Yeah, the last three chapters were on Bitcoin. Yeah.
As a lawyer and analyzing certain things, and even from a post-mortem engineering standpoint, as I had to do back in my data engineering days, this really reminded me of, you need 47 pages to explain what happened in order to have your one paragraph at the end of the page that comes to your conclusion. And that's what this is. But instead of it being a truly analytical, this is what happened, there's some things missing. So a lot of inconsistencies that we can kind of talk about if you want to. Tony, you mentioned that you didn't study anything before, 1900s. Do we want to attack the Keynes issue? I think that'd be a fun conversation.
I love that.
Yeah, can we at least can we at least jump to like 1850 for?
Oh yeah, we're going to go to we're going to go to the Great Depression.
Can we forgo like the?
We're going straight to the Great Depression.
Of African beads and stuff. I mean, I thought they were good for.
I do think there's worth noting a little bit the pre-19th century stuff on the gold standard he goes through. I mean, like, I don't think that he tells the complete story of the gold standard in any way, shape, or form, where he starts at Isaac Newton and he goes all the way up until like basically the United States unpegs the dollar, right?
There's some big leaps in there, yeah.
Yeah, and I look at that, like, I don't think that there's any acknowledgement of the fact that gold is limited. The libertarian argument for the gold standard is that we have to be on a stand, like there's that money should be backed by this precious metal, with no acknowledgement that there's not even enough precious metal in the world to demonstrate the value that we need to represent with currency.
Well, wait a minute.
Hold on. Let Junseth finish.
I mean, the whole concept is
his sentence. You got 5 seconds to finish.
He completely jumps over the fact that all precious metal debates were run basically by lobbyists who were advocates for people who were holding silver or gold, and that largely the gold standard is based on lobbyist arguments for people that benefited from it.
Tone, go ahead.
Okay. I don't remember that point being made about like lobbying.
That's my point.
Okay, so what Junseth is saying is that the gold standard is not as black and white as it appears to be made in Seibert book. He's saying that there's a lot of other layers that are going on with that. Is that?
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Okay. Here's the. I mean, I think the book did a lot of good. Like, do I agree with everything in the book? No. And I had Seibert on this channel, and I talked to him about a couple of stuff that wasn't in the book that I was hoping to see. But so this whole idea that silver continues to decouple from gold because silver is no longer a micropayment of gold because of the 20th century, and the ability to almost infinitely subdivide gold. So once you had the ability to technologically subdivide gold infinitely, it doesn't matter how much gold is out there. Why do you say, Junseth, that it's not enough to power the world?
Well, you have to value has to be represented. So, I mean, it's a funny argument to say that, like, we have basically one Olympic-sized swimming pool's worth of gold in the entire world for everything. All right, and it's just like we can have this sort of artificially inflated value wherein, like, the floating price of gold is supported by the fact that governments are taking huge amounts of supply out of the saleable gold and basically storing it in Fort Knox, or we can
Well, hold on to that. Hold on to that thought for a second. How is that not any different than the HODL theory in Bitcoin?
Well, governments aren't participating in the HODL theory for Bitcoin at the moment.
I'm talking about not governments participating, but if this is a decentralized, far superior monetary structure, and
well, I'm not the one making that argument, Jason.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is the same idea of market manipulation that you're talking about, of entities removing or not allowing the store of value to go out.
I'm actually not arguing market manipulation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's the government's pulling the supply of, like, the thing with gold is it's difficult because you have to have enough supply basically for sale to support the floating price of gold. Just before we went off the monitor, before we depegged the currency, we actually had to make an emergency shipment to London's Bank of England of a huge amount of gold with a special arm of, I think it's the Navy, that basically operates as quick and emergency delivery boys.
You're talking about back in 1913, 1914 timeframe?
No, Nixon.
Oh, in the 70s. Okay, sorry. There's been a couple of times that we've gone away from the gold standard in the United States.
Well, that's the other thing is, what's the difference between the gold standard and fiat if the government's in charge of it?
I want to get Tone in here. Tone, from the coverage of the book of 1900s forward, which is what you wanted to talk about, what in here did you find informative, or is there anything in here that you didn't know before that made you go out and check and say, hey, is that right? Or was it basically stuff you already knew and you were nodding your head yes?
No, it was a couple of things that I didn't know that I learned, which is why I really, really liked it. And a lot of it, like concepts. It's not something that, hey, I need to run out and fact check it, right? I know that's what you do as a lawyer, and that's what Junseth does for an unpaid living. But but I didn't do that. And when Junseth, when you talk about governments are pulling the supply of gold, making it a smaller and smaller piece of gold, creating the price discovery of gold, we're having a similar issue in Bitcoin even today. And this is going to be a big issue into the future. And one of my big concerns for Bitcoin is if it does become a similar, if the world does get on this Bitcoin standard, similar to the gold standard, and government starts to pull Bitcoin liquidity as a hodler out, that's actually a concern for me.
It's great for you. That's just so stupid. It's great for you.
No, it's not.
Yes,
Why
it is.
Go ahead.
Because they have to buy it, which means that there will be less supply for sale, which means that what happens to the price in standard economics, Tone? What happens? Lower supply.
Oh, no, the price goes up. I know,
wow,
but
price goes way up. That's awesome for us.
Well, this brings us into
so I have a couple of things there, right? So yes, in a selfish way, that would be awesome for me. But I like to think further down the road. And one of the reasons why the government was able to confiscate the gold in 1933 was because like 80-90% of all the gold was sitting at the banks that they regulated. So it was a matter of a phone call, and 80% of the gold is now the government's, and they can do whatever the hell they like going forward. So that is the concern, right? If Bitcoin does become the standard and central banks are now holding Bitcoin.
Do you know why we had to confiscate gold?
Do
you know why we had to confiscate gold?
Oh, they wanted to control the currency.
No, we had to confiscate gold in order to supply the markets with gold.
Well, no, they supplied the markets with
currency control.
You see, what was going on in the 1930s? You got to remember, in 1933, they did that. You're in the middle of the Great Depression, right?
Yes.
And what was happening is the United States wanted the dollar to be worth more, right? So what they did is they kept raising inflation rates in order to have the dollar be worth more. However, in the meantime, until they did that, people were doing a run on the bank because each dollar could get you gold, right? So they were handing that in, and banks had to get shut down because the banks were running out of gold. So the government had to step in and say, all right, in order to preserve the currency, preserve the economy, stop the runs on the banks for gold, we're going to be the centralized supply. And on top
there's a phenomenal book on United.
I don't recall reading about big runs on the.
There's a whole movie about it. It's called "It's a Wonderful Life." There were runs on banks left and right, but Tone, like, look, there's a great book on the history of gold, particularly in this area of the world in the United States, and a large reason why the gold standard did or didn't work. It's called The United States of Gold. It's a phenomenal history on gold in the Western world. And like, it's just, to me, the gold standard is nothing more than a libertarian wet dream. And you know what's even more funny is when you analyze who's purchasing gold coins today, where most of the gold sales are. Basically, the government confiscated gold, has a shit ton of it. They're like, we don't know what to do with this now because it literally it's inert. It doesn't do shit. What should we do with it?
We're having at Fort Knox for it.
Right. So then South Africa was like, well, let's make the Krugerrand. And so everyone started buying the Krugerrand. And then what happened is the world looked at South Africa and said, you know what, apartheid's pretty bad. Let's not buy things from South Africa. Right. So then Canada was like, we'll make the maple leaf. So then everyone started buying the maple leaf. In the United States, like, fucking libertarians are buying this shit left and right. We got to get in on this. So like a huge majority, a large percentage of gold is being minted now that you can buy with your fiat, and you can store your wealth in gold if you want to. It's being printed by the United States to sell back to libertarian idiots.
Well, no, I'm
go ahead, Tom.
I'm with you there. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
You and Trace Mayer.
No, I said I'm with you on this. I mean, I have some gold coins, but not too much.
You do.
Yeah, no, I don't have that many. I have some gold coins. Okay, so
hold on. I want to move into the next topic because we have limited time, and I appreciate you setting this up. And
let's quickly finish up on this, right? Like,
okay, 20 seconds.
Look, I think it's a concern if the government has all of it, because if gold was still decentralized and distributed amongst actual people who never actually held it because it was held at the banks, this is where I think Bitcoin is a little bit different. And Bitcoin does have properties that, gold didn't have.
Except, I think statistically, and somebody can fact check me on this, but don't 1% of the people in Bitcoin hold 99% of all the Bitcoin value?
No, that's incorrect.
What is the number?
I don't know what the number is, but that's incorrect.
Junseth, do you know?
It's probably true. I don't know what the Gini coefficient is on Bitcoin, but like there's a lot of value. Yes, particularly if you attribute those early wallets to Satoshi, that's probably true. Then the question is how much of that is locked up. I don't know that it matters.
Well, let's go to another section. In one of his arguments here, when Seibert says that there's widespread use and adoption of Bitcoin, and he seems to think that there could be maybe up to 100 million people that are using Bitcoin, but then he goes on in a footnote to say, I have no idea if that's true or not. Which to me is just amazing. How many people, I mean, from one of the things that, obviously network effect, people talk about that, and people talk about adoption and store of value and market. Obviously the Austrian component of all of this, from the Austrian economical view that Seibert even quotes, is that the market is going to decide what is going to be its store of value, right? And but simultaneously with that, he seems to forget that markets can change their mind on what a store of value is going to be from time to time, right?
Sure.
What this suggests is that, and what the book suggests is that Bitcoin is going to become the standard, and he doesn't contemplate anything else ever replacing it, which is really against Austrian concepts.
I don't think that's true.
And I think You don't think it's against Austrian concepts?
No, I don't think it's fundamentally against Austrian concepts to think something might not replace a good store of value. I don't think that's really in any way against Austrian concepts.
Okay, I could probably agree with that if the market.
I'm not an Austrian, by the way. I like to identify myself as the world's most vociferous Keynesian because it pisses Bitcoiners off.
Okay. Tone, before we move to the Keynes section in here, do you want to talk about the Austrian component that was in here? I'll ask both of you, when you read the book and you started reading some of the concepts on the Austrian concepts and the idea that Bitcoin wouldn't be replaced in the market, did it make you go out and research anything else? Did it cause you to engage in academia and go out and explore what you knew?
No, I mean, that's my stand. I mean, I don't expect Bitcoin to be replaced by anything, any other altcoin and crypto. If it's going to be replaced, it would need to be something significantly better technology, and I don't expect that to come around this early.
We talk about that on the 10th birthday.
Yeah.
Right?
So no, because the main reason for that is that if another altcoin replaces Bitcoin as a store of value, I think all store of value ideas inside a blockchain are gone. It's just that I don't see how anyone else in their right mind would trust an altcoin with a store of value, because then you'll realize that the store of value in a blockchain is fungible. You can just migrate again.
Fundamentally, that's true. I mean, if the store of value changes from time to time, and it kind of ceases to be a store of value.
Right.
So the idea of jumping ship from store of value to store of value kind of seems crappy.
I'm going to read a passage here, and then I want you both to either say whether you agree with this principle or not. All right. Even apart from the instability due to speculation, there is the instability due to the characteristics of human nature that a large portion of our positive activities depend on spontaneous optimism rather than mathematical expectations, whether moral or hedonistic or economic. Most, probably, of our decisions to do something positive, the full consequences of which will be drawn out over many days to come, can only be taken as the result of animal spirits, a spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, and not as the outcome of a weighted average of quantitative benefits multiplied by quantitative probabilities. Tone.
Hey. Junseth. Yes, Jason.
So this author is talking about how economics and the study of economics really can't be quantitatively analyzed when you get human nature and spontaneity involved. Would you agree with that?
I mean, that's how bubbles form, isn't it?
Sure. Junseth?
If Tone knows that that's how bubbles form, he could be a Pulitzer Prize winning billionaire right now. So good luck, Tone.
No, I didn't say I can predict bubbles. I'm just saying that, I mean, that to me is kind of like the point, right? You can study all the economics you like, but how do you stop people from acting rationally and not cause speculative bubbles? And you can't. Yes. So that's why we continue to have speculative bubbles.
Dude,
sure.
You guys know who wrote that passage?
Adam Smith.
No.
Seibert.
No.
Keynes.
Right? And what's interesting here is that when you read Seibert's book and his criticism of Keynes, he writes on page 52, academic economics stopped being an intellectual discipline focused on understanding human choices under scarcity to improve their conditions. So Seibert's claiming that under Keynesian theory that people stop studying basically human choices under Keynesianism. But this is one of the most often quoted sentence out of the general theory of employment, interest, and money, right? Is the human experience. So much so that Seibert even continues on page 116, and he just can't let it go. Contrary to Keynesian animist mythology, right? So on 116, Seibert acknowledges that Keynesianism is about studying the human animist spirit, right? The animal spirit, which back in the day, right, back in the 1900s, people talked about psychology in a way of, you have your animal spirit, you have multiple other things, but which was, the term of the time, which is basically people's mental state. He claims that that's what he does is studying the animal state of people. But then on page 52, prior to that, says that Keynesianism doesn't take into account that human element. And so when I got to page 116, I had to turn back to 52, and I sat here going back and forth going, the fuck? What are we, really?
This is the frustration, though, with like the general public's understanding of Keynes. Keynes says a lot of stuff, some of it possibly contradictory, right? He says a lot of things. And when you boil things down to like this sort of Mises versus Keynesian argument, you get into really stupid territory, because Keynes makes a lot of really good points about monetary value. Tons. One of the many like sort of principles that people derive from Keynes is that money is nothing more than really a squaring system. It's not
that's money, right? But
yes,
money is not the end all study of economics.
Right. Well, he's a monetarist, right?
Maybe. What do you think, Tone? How do you? Let's get back to the comparison here of the inconsistencies, which really start to kind of just crack the layer of the onion of Seibert problems with Keynes. Do you see any conflicting statements between saying that Keynes doesn't take into account, the human element, the human choices under scarcity, and then simultaneously blaming him for animist mythology, which is a referral to obviously Keynes's most often quoted statement out of the General Theory of Employment?
Right. So my view on it is, look, obviously, I do believe that Keynes knew a fair deal about economics, and but his solution to it
of an economics journal in England, right?
And the thing is, his solutions were to be able to control that animal spirit, and you can't.
Well, you can.
No, you can't.
Well, so here's the thing, Tone. Like a century of of evidence says that in some ways you can. It literally is the management of externalities.
Okay, so I'm just moving on to Seifert's review of Keynes here, page 95. And this, I'm not the first guy to see this. After I saw this, I went out and to see if anybody else took a little umbrage with this. And in fact, the libertarian think tank Cato Institute, who's not necessarily the biggest Keynes fan on the planet, wrote an entire review and just killed Seibert for this segment. I'm just going to read this and I'll get your reaction. It is no coincidence that the breakdown of the family, right? So now, not only we're talking about breakdown of like monetary policy, economics, et cetera, the breakdown of the family has come about through the implementation of the economic teachings of a man who never had any interest in the long term, a son of the rich family that had accumulated significant capital over generations. Keynes was a libertine hedonist who wasted most of his adult life engaging in sexual relationships with children.
Yeah, I remember that part.
Around the Mediterranean.
I'm just impressed.
Brothels.
Like most of his time, like 22 hours, like more than 12 hours a day were spent doing that. Absurd.
So when I read this as a lawyer, I go, okay, and this is about the last time he mentions Keynes in the book, right? I mean, he goes on to talk about, comparisons to Mises and Austrian economics, et cetera. But when he's really kind of comparing the economy at all directly to Keynes, this is like his final argument to the jury, right? Not only does this guy not understand economics, but he's a boy fucker too, right?
Yeah. Well, what's funny about that is the evidence for it is tenuous. right? He has some journal, like Keynes apparently had some journal entries.
Yeah, I checked it.
Talk about it.
He actually said that there was something like boy and refreshment ready for me in it, or
Italy,
somebody else. No, it was a couple of different places, but there's a couple of reference to boy and refreshment.
Yeah, apparently in Italy at the time, the age of consent was like 14 or something as well. So like there's speculation all around this, but like
regardless, this is
Seibert doesn't know it. It's utter conjecture, and it's not based on like historicity in any way. It's based on complete conjecture and nothing more than ad hominem.
It is ad hominem, but however, there are a few letters that were recovered that appear to be authentic, that these conversations took place. But what I'm getting at here, first of all, before I sum up, Tone, what are your thoughts on Seibert basically trying to discredit anything Keynesian and claiming that the breakdown of the family unit today is based off of economic theory that's derived out of a man's desire to be homosexual and a pedophile? Do you think our economy today is based off of homosexuality?
I will admit that when I was listening to those parts, because I listened to the book on tape as I was driving around, when I listened to those parts, that was unexpected. I wasn't exactly sure why those parts were in there. But
guys, real quick, is this clickbait? Is that what this is?
I don't know. He did go after me on Twitter. He said that I'm a fat man who defends a pedophile.
Wow.
I didn't see the Twitter war you guys got into. I will admit that I mean, it was good to learn. If true, it's probably good to know information. I wasn't sure why it was in that book
for a second,
because it doesn't. I didn't think it was economically relevant.
I don't think it's economically relevant either, except he's trying to tie a link between today's global economic policy and comparing that to be the economic policies intrinsically of someone who is a homosexual and someone who is a pedophile, right? Or let's say, instead of going that far, right? Because hedonism and
if you guys get my channel banned, I just like.
I apologize.
Maybe we should like switch topics for that.
Okay, let's talk about how much we love Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, that'll get him banned.
Not helping.
In 2 seconds. But you know, being a libertine hedonist, libertine being the most extreme version of hedonism, includes also not caring about establishments, right? And so if I am to take Seibert in saying, oh, he's talking about doing away with 200 years of economic theory and breaking down those existing establishments, well, sure, anarchy, right? Libertine could be compared to anarchy when it comes to, you know, breaking down those belief structures. I get that. I'm there. I'm on board. Got it. Keynes was breaking the wheel. But when he says and compares that to, you know, his pursuit of sexual activity with boys, he's now taking out of that, you know, no government libertine definition and taking it into the extreme sexual orientation type deal. And I just don't think it's relevant for him.
I agree.
I don't think it's relevant for him to make his
like those sections in the book either. That's fine. Look, you write a 300-page book. There's going to be parts
about pedophiles. Every 300-page book I've read is the same. Like, it's not like you choose what you put on each page, especially when you're a sloppy painter like Seibert.
All right, guys, go on.
Okay, so we've got what do we have? About 11 minutes left.
The entirety of the book, by the way, as I read it, there were these.
Hold on. I just want to get a time check. Tone, how much longer can you go?
I got about 10 minutes, guys.
You got about 10 minutes. Okay, so
just real quick, as I read the book,
wait,
like
Junseth, hold on. Let me set up the next 10 minutes, okay?
Sure.
And trust me, I'm going to turn you loose. There are multiple parts in the book that I will say challenged me to go out and verify the content of the book, because I looked at it and said, you know, I just don't think that's right. And some of it was, and some of it just wasn't. I have multiple pages dog-eared and highlighted and hours of notes of where, you know, I'm like CNN fact checking Trump on this, right?
He's spent most of his adult life fact checking this book.
So regardless what I'd like you each to do now with the brief time we have left is I want to start with Tone. Tone, you've got people watching. Maybe they haven't read the book. Why don't you give your assessment, if you can, of the book and why somebody should buy it? See, I'm trying to sell books for Seibert here.
I know. I'm actually giving out like 25 of those, 25 plus of those books.
Did Seibert give you those books to hand out?
No, I paid for them.
Did you really?
Yeah.
All right. Now, listen, belief structure is good. You believe in it. You're going to spend your own money to give it out. All right, go ahead. So you're handing out 25 books to people, but you're not going to tell them to go buy it? That's
No, I am. Look, I really enjoyed the book. It gave me a better understanding of the monetary history. Now, I know you two, again, like you're the investigative, you're a lawyer. I mean, or the investigative part is implied from Discovery. I know you guys are fact checking every little thing in the history of that book. And I would love for you to write a better version
I have
of it.
Like multiple sections
I'm sure.
in this book that I've just...
I would, no, look, I want you to publish it. Look, okay, so this was supposed to be on Jason Seibert's channel, and I was going to come in there to help defend the book because Seibert has blocked both of these guys on Twitter long ago, I believe. And it happened on my channel because
I was having technical difficulty
together. But
yeah. Hey, at least I started early enough today to make sure that everything was going to work, suspecting I was going to have a problem. And when we figured out I was having a problem, Tone, thank you for switching over to your channel. That's why we started as early as
because I'm getting a lot of shit. Like Jason is moderating it. It's supposed to be on his channel. I've known these guys for a long time, probably a very, very long time. Some of the first crypto people I knew.
We're all friends.
And okay, look. There's several things I learned about that book. I learned, but some of that stuff you're saying wasn't accurate. So maybe I have to go and do my own research and double check that, right? Again, when I read a book by a economic PhD professor, I am expecting that book to be fully researched. And
but he doesn't have a PhD in economics. He's got a PhD in like sustainable development.
Out of Columbia. So that was correct, right?
Maybe. I mean, it's confusing to me. Look, he's obviously educated and he's a professor. Go ahead, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Right. There was a lot of good takeaways from the book. I thought he had an amazing summary as to why it's going to be Bitcoin, as to why it's not going to be altcoins. I learned a great deal about monetary policy and gold and why there is not going to be any silver to Bitcoin's gold. That was my biggest takeaway from the book. The whole concept of, hey, silver has been decoupling from gold for a long time. I wasn't exactly sure why. Listening to the gold bugs and the libertarians, as you know, Junseth, they're all about the silver. Seibert did an amazing job explaining why it will never be silver.
So on that note, I want you to go back and take a look at the use of gold and silver from 1834 to 1850 and why silver stopped being a currency in the United States. It has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with external governments hoarding it and taking it away. But I'll let you do your research on that.
Yeah, no, I'm with that as well. There were a lot of interesting stuff that goes on there that I've read about in the past as well. And I thought it was a great summary of monetary policy and a very good explanation as to why Bitcoin I expect to succeed. Is it going to become the actual global financial standard? I have no idea. I really, really don't. We all continue to use Bitcoin. Maybe not you, Jason, but I'm sure Junseth still continues to use Bitcoin.
Yeah, of course.
What makes you use Bitcoin?
Well, I don't know. Maybe you prefer Litecoin because it gets there faster. Or you seem to prefer bank wires.
I actually don't hold any Litecoin. But my argument on your show the other day was to show that we already have tools and systems in the planet that work just as well or better than Bitcoin. That's all I was doing, was making an argument. So
Well, guys,
Johnson,
I'm not exactly sure how you want me to defend like very specific statements out of a 300-page
No.
book that you spend more time researching that one statement than, you know.
no,
than-
that Tone, 20 seconds or less. Who should buy the book?
I think it's a really good read. I think people should buy I think every shitcoiner should buy the book. Anyone that believes that their altcoin is going to succeed over Bitcoin should certainly buy the book. And we didn't even get into this whole discussion of, look, the 2% inflation has been great. We've had a good run. It's going to end because exponential growth is not sustainable. Exponential functions are not sustainable. Now,
I don't even know what that means.
Your 20 seconds are up now. Tone, I wanted you to say, why should somebody buy the book? You said it's a good read, and altcoiners should read it to learn why they're not going to fail. Now, Tone, why should somebody not buy the book?
Why should somebody not buy the book?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a reason for them not to buy the book. I mean, if you want to understand Bitcoin in a concise way and how it came about and learn some monetary history, you should read that book. Like, I don't have a reason for you not to read it. It was a great book to read. I really enjoyed it. I have no reason for why you should not buy it.
Okay, Junseth, why should somebody buy this book? And try to be, don't be smarmy or sarcastic. Yeah. Just intellectual Junseth. Why should somebody buy this book?
There's not that person doesn't exist. So let's say you're like the last person on earth and you've read everything there is to read. You should buy the book. It's the last book. Honestly, it's one of the worst books I've ever read. It's a terrible read. Tone is not right. I feel like the entire book is a reading.
Name a better Bitcoin book. Name a better book to explain Bitcoin, even to though. Okay, so I said earlier that altcoin.
Andreas Antonopoulos, with his Programming Bitcoin.
What about this book? Is this a better book?
I'll bet Bitcoin for Dummies better explains it, although I bet it doesn't. But I probably, there's other books. You could make a case that William Mughly has a better book than Saifedean.
No, you can't.
This one was special.
Go ahead. Make a case that William Mughly has a better book. Make a case that what do you call him? Chris Berninski has a better book.
I think that the Saifedean book is a narrative account that is incomplete, uninteresting, and has very little strong factual basis. It's a lot of conjecture. I didn't find it interesting, and what scares me about the book is that it's filled with these inaccuracies that are difficult to sort of suss out because they're said in this very "I am a clever person" way of writing. And
I'll agree with that. He has a tendency to write sentences like "not many people know this," or this has been brushed away from history, right? And so he tries to give you some feeling that maybe he's sharing some insider secret with you when all you have to do is Google it, and that information that he's supposed to say is secret isn't there. But sorry, I interrupted you, Junseth. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just don't find it like I think Frances Coppola did one of the better takedowns online in her estimation. The history of finance is extremely nuanced. It's very difficult. You look at England when Isaac Newton introduced what we call the gold standard today. England had a very interesting sort of perpetual motion machine wherein people were clipping coins because they had a legal value of gold. They were putting them on boats, sending them to France, selling them for the floating point that France had, and then shipping it back, and then taking the money back in England and buying more coins and clipping them. And it was as a result, England became.
I want you to know what you just described is exactly what Ponzi was doing when he was legitimately doing stamps.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. We only have about 1 minute left. This is going to be my summary. I'm going to tell you why you should buy the book. You should buy this book if you want to be challenged intellectually to go out and figure out and challenge yourself what you do know and what you don't know. Because I think you should read just maybe 4 or 5 pages a night, and then write some notes like I did, and say, all right, go and check whether or not whether or not the rhinestones actually fell because of O'Keefe. Right? It partially did, but there's more to it. And what I found interesting about the book is I went to Merrillhurst. I got a degree in interdisciplinary studies there, focused on business, information, and communication systems. And it was part of the interdisciplinary studies. We were trained to look at things from multiple angles. And I'm sure from an economist point of view, it was absolutely O'Keefe messing with the systems in the rhinestones that caused the failure. But that's an economics point of view, right? That's a very narrow point of view that doesn't take into account all the other things that were occurring at that time. In here, he claims that the fall of the Yuan dynasty was as a result of hyperinflation and fiat currency, and he leaves out that the Yuan dynasty, right? That's the dynasty that Kublai Khan had, and it was right before the Ming dynasty. He leaves completely out that there was absolute racial hatred for the Han Chinese, and they rose up and overthrew Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty. But he claims that it's the currency that caused that problem. The Han Chinese ended up creating the Ming dynasty that lasted for 270 years, right? So it's just this. There's a little bit of fact in everything that's being said, and it's only said from an economist point of view. And so I get that. I get that from an argument standpoint, but it's an incomplete argument, and that's what was disappointing to me. So if you want to be challenged and you want to go out and you want to do treasure hunts on things for information and become a more well-rounded person for saying, hey, thanks for giving me a starting point on this subject matter, you can become much more educated by fact-checking Seyfettin's work. And some of it's right, some of it's good, some of it's correct, some of it is just, it's not there. The end sections, the writings on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin questions section, and there's some leaps of faith here, but I think that would be obvious because Bitcoin is a leap of faith. When you say that, mathematically it can't be defeated, that's a probability statement because it can be. We almost had that last year when Bitmain approached 51%. So if you read it,
that was still debatable.
I don't think that's true.
You don't think Bitmain got close to 51%?
I did think it would be arguable what 51%, close to 51% means.
Oh, understood. Let's not go down that path. The point I'm making is there are a lot of opinions in this book that lead to more information. Any last thoughts, closing thoughts? Tone?
So do you guys think Seyfettin is bad for the crypto space or good for the crypto space? Since you guys had just had a crazy critique, you wish he never wrote the book, you wish nobody reads the book.
I didn't say that.
I think he's right, and he can write the book and people can read it. I just think it's dumb.
What do you think about Seyfettin and his role currently in the crypto space, speaking to other economists, publicly speaking, like being an advocate of Bitcoin? What do you think of it? What do you guys think of Seyfettin outside of the book?
He's embarrassing. He talks to economists and he's talking to economists who are presenting the case against Bitcoin often, and he himself is presenting a really bad case for Bitcoin. The argument for Bitcoin has nothing to do with whether it is the standard or whether it could be the standard. I think libertarians like to make the argument that Bitcoin is good money. I don't think that the argument for Bitcoin is even that. I think that the argument for Bitcoin is that this is interesting. We don't necessarily know exactly what it does, but it clearly has use. And I think you can articulate a lot of those uses in things like buying drugs online and gambling. I think that those are gambling is probably the biggest use case for Bitcoin right now. And if you look at any of the gambling sites, they offer giant discounts in order to basically take Bitcoin pays to have you pay in Bitcoin, and even to pay you out in Bitcoin. It's much quicker, it's much faster. So Bitcoiners or gamblers absolutely see the value here. Other industries see the value in this for high risk remittance. We know there's value here. We don't completely understand it. It's not that it's good money, as I think every libertarian loves to say.
I think I'm going to actually wrap it up and summarize what you just said, Junseth, by actually quoting Seibert.
This dude is dumb. This dude is a numbnuts fact. Write the book.
No. He says,
I'm looking at the at the comments. Tony, your fans are dicks.
Yeah, only to you as they should be.
No, that's fine.
So Seibert says, this creates a new type of asset well suited for playing the role of store of value. That's basically the answer to the question that he was trying to create through these multiple. And let me say this. This sentence is a passive sentence. It's not a declarative sentence. It doesn't say that it is. It doesn't say that it's currently doing it, but that it could be. And to that, I agree with.
Someone just called me Fat Bin Laden.
This is just showing the intellectual prowess of space and how
you don't see Bitcoin as a good store of value.
I don't think I think Bitcoin, at least as it is constituted today, is not a good store of value. And that's, I mean, it's not a criticism of it. I think you look at Bitcoin over the last couple of years, it goes up and up and up. You can't buy one suit with what you could have bought in 2010. You can buy 10,000 suits with what you would have been holding in 2010, or even more than that, maybe 200,000 suits. So
yeah, but the guy that bought it last year, that bought Bitcoin last year at 20,000. He can't even buy a shoelace today for what he did back then, right? So that to me, because it's not a consistent performer day to day, means that it's today not a store of value from that traditional sense. And I had an entire section on sound money and store of value and comparing notes of what was in here and what other economists say.
Well, yeah, no, it's not.
Junseth, you came down to Panama when I was there, and you saw all my windows and all the scribbles that are on them. I have multiple windows in this house, and they are filled with my reviews.
Unfortunately, guys, I do have to get to dinner. We can debate Bitcoin another time. But when you cherry pick certain statements out of the book and start fact checking them, and your fact checking comes back different, obviously there's nothing I can say about that.
That wasn't the purpose of this. The purpose of that was, and basically putting my lawyer hat on now, I understand what happened in this book, and that by providing half facts in order to build the end result argument, you're able to be very convincing and very persuasive. However, what I would like to see, and I may not be the guy to do it because I'm working on a different book, but I'd like somebody to actually complete all the arguments that are in here and make the argument against it. The book that I'm working on right now is how cryptocurrency and code can be political speech and protected under the First Amendment. And it's taking up a lot of my time. Otherwise, I would love to write that book. Somebody else should do it. Anyway, I'm done, Tone. Thanks for letting me moderate. I'm going to pass it back to you, and you can wrap up your show.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks for coming on. And hey, look, I'm always, you guys know me. You know that I am willing to listen. And when you guys wanted to discuss Seibert's book, I said sure. And we did it here. I will let my fans and anyone else that watches this leave their comments in there. Safe, I will see you in Vegas. You are my keynote speaker. Love the book. We're giving out the book.
Did you tell Safe that you invited me to come to Vegas? I don't know.
Well, anyone is invited to come to Vegas. I mean, I can't stop you by me telling you not to come to Vegas. There's a higher likelihood of you showing up in Vegas, and same for Junseth and everybody else. That I know you guys too well.
By the way, everyone here knows. Someone just gave you €100 to tell Jason to shut his pie hole. Everyone knows that I'm not listening to a word you say, and I'm just reading these fucking comments. They're so funny. Junseth, I don't have a YouTube channel. I have a show. It's Junseth's World. Okay, sorry, I had to pump that.
That's fine. I'm not scared of competition. Yeah. So
I never
yeah,
even
no.
put on a show. Don't worry.
I mean, I'm not. Every once in a while, I mean, Roger Veer and Craig Wright are invited to Unconfiscatable if they want to show up. Yeah, I mean, we're not gonna. I'm not gonna put you on stage with them. I might put you on the lawyer panel. We'll see. I'm still working that one out. But
I'm sure your fans are debating whether or not I'm actually a lawyer. So there's that.
oh yeah, they are. Hey, can somebody do some fact checking on Jason? Find out if he's a lawyer. I haven't had the time. All right,
Jason,
guys. All right, guys. I gotta run. I'm already late. I didn't have a good thumbnail to use for this, so I used like the one thumbnail I had that I've never used before.
The one that says that it's a scam. I thought I saw. So you're calling Safedian's book a scam. I want everybody to know
It was like
that wasn't me. That was Tone that called it a scam. So
no, I'm calling Junseth a scam. No, I didn't have a good thumbnail. I'll get my graphic designer to do another thumbnail. That's all I had that wasn't like something.
I'm really glad through this whole process I haven't had the YouTube channel open and haven't been able to see any of the comments, but your reaction is amazing.
Jason worked for Ticket Clinic before this.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a one of those places that gets you off of parking tickets and shit. Just fucking, these are great. Some of them are real pricks, but some of them are just great. They're just very thoughtful. I like these guys. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Jason, for 100 euros, I have to tell you to shut your pie hole. I am.
Did you take that money?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the deal. I will shut my pie hole in about 20 seconds, but we got to split it. We're splitting them up.
No, because I can make it by just hitting one button, which I have to hit anyway. You guys, I don't collect the lawyer salary yet, so I'm happy to take the 100 euros. Thank you so much, Desmond, for your generous donation. Hope you guys quasi enjoyed this stream, and I will see all of you on the next one. Bye, guys.